the time that I knew that you were very, very much like obsessed with turkey hunting was when Ava was born. What day was Ava born?
What day it was the opener, wasn't it?
So, yeah, she was, my wife actually went into labor on the first day of turkey season that year. It's March 26th. She was born on 27th.
And when did you kill your first bird of the season then?
On the 26th. There were 5 jakes standing in front of me, and I wasn't going to shoot any of them. And my wife texted me, and my phone was laying next to my leg, and I looked down, and she goes, things are moving. And I went,
oh my!
I bet by the time I read that and the gun went off was probably 2 seconds.
Wow.
And yeah, that was...
Yeah. That was when I knew. When I got that picture, I was like, isn't she...
You're like, wait, this math doesn't add up.
I got back in time.
That's all that matters. You were there. Yeah. You were there.
Well, because Davey was born April 3rd. His due date was April 1st. And Kelsey and I actually went out scouting for turkeys on the 31st, trying to roost birds in the evening. And it was a very long, bumpy road. And I think the next day, she kind of just started to have some labor. I think it was the bumpy road that kind of started things for her.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No
I was out hunting on his due date, and the same thing is very much made sure I had cell phone service, looking at the phone.
Yeah.
And then when I got back that day, things kind of started to happen.
That is wild. We are going to have some wild stories today on our podcast. So everybody that's listening and watching on YouTube, welcome back to the Save It for the Blind podcast. Across from me today, we have Kevin Vella, who's been on this podcast multiple times. He is CWA extraordinaire, as well as used to be the NWTF Western Regional Biologist. So I think he has a little bit of grounds to stand on when it comes to turkeys. And Kevin, if you want to introduce our other guest today, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so today I drug in Dan Skalos. Dan works for the department. How long have you worked for the department now?
11 years.
11 years for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he's currently the Upland and Waterfowl Program Supervisor.
Yep. Worked most of the years in the waterfowl unit. I've been a waterfowl biologist since 2004 when I moved out here. I actually worked for CWA in 2004, 2005.
And you're originally from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Went to school in upstate New York.
And why'd you come out here?
I wanted to work on ducks. And,
So is turkeys an afterthought and ducks are your forethought?
You know, it's kind of weird when you say that. Like, I mean, when I was a kid, it was like I was just all turkeys all the time, right?
Okay,
It was my dad's favorite thing to do. It was my favorite thing to do.
Oh, it's a big thing in PA, man.
It is, and my dad kind of grew up. You look at the history of turkeys in North America or in the U.S. Like back east, there were none. Up until about the 70s, and that's when my dad started hunting. And my mom says I remember vividly the first time he ever shot one because he tried so hard to get one for many years, and they weren't high density, right?
Yeah.
So by that I mean, geez, that was 15 years before I was born. I think it was when he got his first one, and by the time I was born, they were actually relatively common.
Yeah.
So it was a lot different story, but yeah. When I took it was like before high school. I hunted every single day.
Yeah.
It's very different than out here. But going up to New York, when I went to school in upstate, same thing. I hunted before class all the time.
Yeah.
So then when I moved out here, I've hunted a number of different states, but nothing like California. I mean, it is impressive here. So
yeah. Well, and like Carson mentioned, working for the NWTF and getting to meet people from across the country, it's wild how many turkeys we actually have here and how much opportunity we actually have here.
Yeah, I don't think I appreciate it because I'm a late onset turkey hunter. It's like I grew up duck hunting, deer hunting, but my dad never turkey hunted, so we'd go walk around, like a Feather River Wildlife area at 12 o'clock with a hand gobble thing and like scare off a hen off her nest and be like, we saw a turkey. And now when I got hired on by CWA, my boss goes, you know how to turkey hunt? I go, I don't know how to turkey hunt. He goes, well, figure it out because you're gonna be guiding turkey hunters. I was like, all right, now it's one of my favorite things to do. So like I haven't seen the influxes of turkeys and the downslide. So I've just known for I guess 7 years now of what it's been. So I've only had a little snippet.
Yeah, spoiled for sure. I'll tell you that.
Well, that's good and bad, I guess.
Well, it's interesting, like what Dan brought up is, his dad tried so hard because before then we didn't really have any turkeys around. So you don't find like that like third generation turkey hunter because there's only been 2 generations hunting turkeys.
Oh, that's interesting.
You look at the Colonel Tom Kelly, like that was the old school days of turkeys when they were just small populations in, Alabama and other parts of the South and, a couple spots in the West. It was just a whole different deal. So now we're living in the good old days of turkey hunting. I mean, obviously the Southeast has seen some pretty recent declines and they're struggling from where they were back in, kind of around the turn of the century. But out West, we're very fortunate to have what we have and the opportunity that we have.
So then let's take this back. If we're saying, in California, there isn't that 3rd generational turkey hunter, then how did the turkeys get here to the populations that they are now? So go back to from when there wasn't any to where we are now. How did that happen?
Yeah, do you want to take that one on, Dan?
Yeah, sure. So actually, Kevin and Catherine Miller, who's our upland game bird biologist, put together a presentation. I was recently looking over that on the introductions to California, and it's really fascinating stuff. So, the initial, if you really want to, consider the first introduction in California.
Yeah, let's go back to the captive birds.
1877, Catalina Island.
Okay.
I don't really call that, it's an island, so it's not exactly like we started stalking the mainland, but there were some introductions and very few, more in the early 1900s. But when you start to get into like the late 50s, early 60s, that's when things started kicking up. And so for about a 30, 40 year period there, it started with an initial captive breeding program down out of Tulare, I believe it was, where someone created this, quote, California hybrid. I think it was a mixture of what appeared to be Goulds and Merriams. So decent mixture. I think if you're trying to pull from certain traits, it's not a bad idea. And so they were introducing that pen-reared stock, and then they were translocating stock in from Texas, in Kansas, I believe, bringing in mostly Rio Grandes. And so they're bringing those birds in. They're taking the captive stock, moving them around. And then things really started to pick up like in the 70s and 80s. And then by the time we got into the 90s, it was less bringing in stock from out of state and more of just translocating stock within state. And what's interesting, there's only one survey that we have that goes back and kind of covers that record. It's the Breeding Bird Survey that's conducted every spring, across the country. It's just a bunch of sort of driving routes where folks go out. They'll stop at given locations on the route, like their 17-mile routes. And they do these point counts. And so when we look at that, it goes back to the 50s, early or mid 50s. Turkeys were just kind of present at a relatively low abundance. Like it's kind of weird because it isn't it doesn't give you a total number of turkeys, but it's the number of turkeys per route, right? And so when you just think about it in that context, we were a quarter turkey per route, for a really long time. And then around 1990, things just started to double. It was interesting when you look at it that way. And that kind of coincides with a lot of the translocations we did. As we started to swap things around, something happened there, and they just started to increase. And up until about, I want to say, it was about 2010, that number finally peaked, and now is more or less leveled out. But we've gone from a quarter turkey per route to 1.5 to 2 turkeys per route.
Wow.
In most areas around the state. So, but thinking about it in that context, a lot of turkeys now. And you look at the 04 strategic plan, they tried to do a total abundance estimate. When you go back when that was written, it's probably 2002, 2003, published in 04. Estimates of like 242,000 turkeys, just is somewhat speculation, but probably 4 times that amount.
Well, it's so hard. And it's so hard in the state to quantify anything with turkeys because, you don't have to have a turkey tag.
Yep.
It's an upland game bird validation. You're allowed 3 birds in the spring, 3 birded birds in the spring, 1 per day. But without a tag, we don't have any idea of percent success. We don't really have any idea of hunter effort. There have been some surveys through like responsive management, phone surveys and such where, we're able to get some of that data, but it's just really hard to know. And I'm not saying we need a turkey tag. There's definitely pros and cons to that. Yeah. But it's just really hard to get data on any type of abundance in turkeys in California, especially something that lives in trees. Yeah. They're not always out in the open on the landscape. A lot of times they are. But they're just a really hard thing to count.
Yeah, detectability is definitely a thing. And, there's not a lot of practical ways of getting like that true abundance number. So when you think about upland game birds just in general, that's kind of like my deal right now is trying to figure out how to estimate, that what we call absolute abundance, like how many quail do you have on the landscape? Do you realize how difficult like the magnitude is? You know what I'm saying? Like try to count mountain quail in these really remote areas and try to even get a number that, that passes the red face test, so to speak. Turkeys would be easier, but still, when you think about how extensive they are statewide in certain areas, it's not a very easy task. So I don't know that we'll ever get like the number that passes the red face test, but we're certainly going to try. But when you look at the survey, though, I mean, just looking at that, okay, like I said, the quarter birder route, we're up to, roughly 2. That's a pretty amazing increase, and it all happened, starting in that late 90s and early 2000s period. And that's, when I got to California in 2004, seemed like there was relatively few turkeys, and then by like 2008, it's like, man, this place is something. Like I said, it's like coming from the east. I remember this one season in Pennsylvania. I was 17. I'm hunting before school every single day. It was exactly 21 days before I heard a gobble. 21 days.
Oh my God.
And I'm sitting on this high tension line, and I'm throwing like literally every call I have, just making noise. Honestly, I was probably just passing time because it's like, this is so boring. But all of a sudden, there's this crack of thunder in the distance, and this bird gobbles. He's not very far away. And a couple minutes go by, and all of a sudden, these hens start pouring out on the high tension line. Full strut coming up, sees a decoy, walks in, first double-bearded bird I ever killed. And that was the second. He gobbled 2 times on the way in. And it was, like I said, 21 days to hear 2 gobbles. Those turkeys were present. There are plenty of them. It's just, the pressure dynamics, things like that. Yes, it's very different. Like there's a lot of turkey hunters back there. And if you've ever hunted those Spenceville, Doherty Hill turkeys, the ones that have been hunted forever, not dumb, not very dumb.
No, it's
You've got to trick them.
I've talked to a lot of turkey hunters across the U.S., and there's people that say, "Oh, Merriam's the easiest bird to kill," or "Rio is easy to kill," and Eastern's held pretty high, and I get that, but every time I talk to those folks, it ends up being that a pressured turkey is the hardest turkey to kill.
Yeah.
No matter what subspecies they are, no matter where they're at, if they're pressured, they're going to shut up, they're going to think about it, and they're going to be a lot harder to kill than those birds that aren't pressured.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, I love when people tell me a certain subspecies is easier or harder to hunt. It doesn't matter. Yeah. If Merriam's is pressured, they're going to be smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. With the, not the general lack of knowledge, but not the complete understanding of our population density, how are we able to give a recommendation for how many birds we can take each year? Because since I've been actively hunting turkeys, it's always been the same: 3 bearded in the spring and then 2 hens in the fall.
Yeah.
Or how will that ever change? Are they working on better science now to try to get population estimates, or is it just gonna be let's ride this wave until we see a huge crash and then figure it out?
When you look at the stance on turkeys, it's changed relatively rapidly, and also with their numbers, right? And when you think about their numbers, like where they're at, a lot of these are urban birds. Our California turkeys, the Davis turkeys, Berkeley turkeys.
Yeah, everybody sees
the nuisance birds.
It's like I get texts from back east all the time about they made the news back.
Yeah,
and so I think with that, and there's some other more rural landowners that are dealing with nuisance issues too. In that context, I think you're going to see the liberal stuff going on for quite some time, right? Long season lengths. The 3-bird bag, all that. Potentially, maybe you could see some changes there in the fall. Right now we're at 2, but I think from the management side, where I could see us going, and this is kind of more, I don't think we're going to be making any changes unless the public wants to make them.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay. That's
and so it's like a survey sort of thing. As you can tell,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, in a way, it's like we're not really getting a lot of complaints from folks, but we've had some historic sort of suggestions, if you want to call them that. And I think Kevin's heard most.
Sure, you're dealing with the public,
right? Well, I mean, it's not like other things. We're not getting this tons and tons of pressure about turkey hunting specifically, but phenology. When you think about the onset of the season. San Diego guys probably looking at, significantly different situation than what we deal with up here in the valley, and the folks up in northeastern Cal are dealing with a different onset. Like particularly the folks in northeastern Cal, it's like by the time the archery season comes in, things are in full swing.
Yeah.
And so maybe some zones could break it up a little bit.
There's literally poults on the ground in San Diego when like nest initiation is happening in Modoc.
Oh yeah,
And those seasons are the same no matter what, because California's one big chunk.
So something that was in that 2004 strategic plan was the initiation of TMUs, turkey management units, and that's something that could be used to break it up. To have at least something that's different from San Diego to Modoc, and to be able to create that structure where you're letting those birds breed in that initial first peak gobble of the season, and then hunting right after that. You're not messing up that first kind of initial breeding portion of it, because there's been a lot of research that's been done in the Southeast where harvesting birds too early before that social structure has been finalized and a bunch of the breeding has been completed, you kill that dominant bird out of the group, and it throws that whole social structure into a complete mess. And it's not just, okay, that hen's going to pick the next dominant bird. It starts over. They have to completely reestablish a pecking order to be able to see who's the dominant tom that's going to breed those hens. And that's where they've actually pushed a lot of those seasons back in the Southeast as they've seen declines, to try to see if that's going to make a difference.
Well, that's interesting, just because speaking for last year, it's like our spring was so late. So in hindsight, those birds were probably getting hammered before they even got established because it was pushed back so much, would be my guess.
Well, but it was also so late, I think.
Like it was almost too late.
I think
they made it through.
I think a lot of people had given up by the time. I mean, I'm sure, like I talked about with Dan, I'm sure that there was, nest initiation happening for some birds in June. I mean, it was so late.
Yeah,
so
particularly up high.
Poults getting born in July. And late.
What's a poult survival rate?
When you talk to the folks in the South, they get excited, when it's +1. Yeah, I mean, and that's average across like every single nest.
One out of what?
1 out of a clutch.
And how many would be in a clutch normally?
10 to 12.
Yeah.
Oof. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And predators, coyotes, what's the main?
Avian predation's number one for poults, man.
Great horned owls.
Yeah, great horned owls.
Interesting.
And then, during the daytime, your diurnal predators are going to be a lot of your red tails and stuff like that, picking them off.
Yeah, it's, once they make it off the nest, things are, looking up from there. But, mom can't keep them safe from everything. And particularly at night, like those nocturnal predators, particularly owls, things like that, can be really rough. Great horns can take full-fledged adults,
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there's, some of that research going on in Georgia. You listen to, Meat Eater and
Dr. Chamberlain.
Yeah, I listened to some of the. I've listened to his couple of podcasts more than one time. It's one of the podcasts I've listened to numerous times because it is fascinating. But you had a pair of great horned owls that killed adult toms, 2 of them.
Yeah,
you're
that's
talking
incredible.
About killing an 18-pound bird on a limb.
Yeah,
knocking them out of the tree, and then also like some of the other mesocarnivores that they were taking out, foxes and things like that, raccoons. It's pretty amazing what that bird can do. And we know, even from duck research too, is like they're a significant source of mortality. It's just, it's like the death radius from the tree.
Yeah.
So, but in the South, I think they're also dealing with a lot of other stuff that we aren't dealing with necessarily here too. The intensification within some of their forests and things like that in terms of like timber and all that. It's not been beneficial to anything. Look at the bobwhite numbers too.
Yeah.
Right? Out here, our turkeys are making it, it seems like though with a lot less, it's like we don't even, some of the places they nest are like these just strict riparian corridors with just very little area, but they're making it work.
Yeah.
And they're nesting behind the office.
They're very adaptable.
That's the part like nationwide that's actually fairly interesting is the whole urban turkey thing seems, it's worse here than in most places that I've seen, but it's all the way across the country. So that part's been kind of interesting. And explaining that, Amanda Beckman was the PhD student from Texas A&M. We helped her get some samples out here in the Davis Cemetery, and she was trying to like piece all that together. Like, what are the possibilities of how this has happened? And I think, is it just as simple as this phenotype has made it work and it's gone, nationwide? That seems kind of tall, right?
Yeah.
It's like across all these subspecies, that's kind of nuts. Or is there some like domestic gene integration or something like that? Or is there there's got to be another explanation. I don't think she's quite got all of her PhD together, at least in that regard. But yeah, it's an interesting to see it happen across the entire country.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see a lot of her PhD stuff, a lot of the genetic stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
She took a lot of samples out of California just looking at different subspecies and genetic lines. And You touched on it earlier of all the translocations, and that was just a shotgun approach of different subspecies. I mean, it was...
Go back a second. Describe to people what a translocation is that might not understand what translocation is.
Yeah, so Dan touched on kind of captive reared birds. So those are birds that were born in captivity, raised in a pen, and then kind of just released into the wild. Super low success on those birds. They did not have the instincts to survive. They didn't have the instinct to avoid predation. They couldn't find, they couldn't forage. They just were not very adaptable to the wild. So what the National Wild Turkey Federation and state and federal agencies did across the entire country is they started capturing birds that were in the wild and then translocating them to areas of suitable habitat, because then those birds already had the survival instincts. They knew how to survive in the wild. They knew how to avoid predation. And then you had really good success in terms of establishing or reestablishing populations. So what they were doing was they were taking birds from Texas, Rio Grandes from Texas out to California. There was Rio Eastern hybrids that were coming out of Kansas. They had Merriam's coming out of Idaho. And literally they put birds in all different types of habitats, just kind of trying to see what stuck. And so you'll see flocks in the Sac Valley that have characteristics of, you'll see in the same flock, something that looks like a Merriam, something that looks like a Rio. You get up to Humboldt County and there's some of those birds that you still have some Eastern traits up there, the real dark black fan. So it's really interesting to see. But the cool stuff about Amanda's work is we were actually able to see that Dan was just telling me about this today, there are some secluded Merriam's flocks in northeastern California that still are like pure Merriam's flocks.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's probably the only pure birds we have left in California at this point?
Yeah.
Looks like it.
Wow.
Yeah, without perfect, statewide coverage, it's kind of difficult to say that for sure, but I would say that's probably the case. Just looking at the translocations, the way that they were done, we probably have no pure Rio Grande stocks, right?
Yeah,
and
so
some of the interesting stuff from her work was like a lot of like state or nationwide, like it doesn't actually look like that.
So PSA to all the turkey hunters out there: if you shoot a turkey, it is a mutt.
Just be very
be happy with your mutt.
Yeah, every turkey's beautiful, man. That's the point. Is don't get stuck and hung up on the subspecies things. A turkey's a turkey; they're a beautiful thing. Just be satisfied with what you got.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that kind of leads you to my next thing. I know I've seen plenty of online stuff. Oh, I shot this Rio, or I shot this Eastern, or I shot this or that, and talking to you and knowing what they are. It's like, well, that's a mutt. So let's go into I shot this bird and it's got a 9-inch beard. It's 10 years old. Or I've got a bird and it has an 1.5 inch spurs. This bird is 3 years old. Are we busting myths here? What are we doing?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a great one. And Dr. Chamberlain has gone on a lot about research about this, and the old guard was looking at beard size. So what you can only tell is the difference between a hatch-year bird and an after-hatch-year bird. A hatch-year bird is going to be your Jakes and your Jennies. After-hatch-year is going to be your Dull. Past that, there's no good characteristic morphologically on a bird that's going to be able to tell you.
No spur length,
no spur length, none of that. Everyone said, once they get to 1 inch, they're 3 years old, 1.25 inches, they're 4 years old, and all this stuff. But, there's been some great banding data actually with the department on Upper Butte Basin. And this is a cool one too, because this happened within one of our programs. So Jeff had... I don't know if it was Jeff or someone was guiding a hunt on hoodoo this last fall, and they killed a banded bird.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And looked at the banding data on that. It was banded 5.5 years ago as a Jake. We caught 8 Jakes that day. It was one of those Jakes that we had caught. And
I'll stop you there. What's a long lifespan for a turkey in the wild?
Hard to know. I mean, you get to 3 years old, I would imagine it's
So 5.5 known-year-old bird, that is an old bird.
Yeah. I would say that's a pretty dang old bird.
And in the old time saying that thing should have a rope on it, or the spurs should be 12 inches at that point.
Exactly. And looking at the data on that, it was obviously it had nubs on it when we caught it as a Jake, but as a 5.5-year-old bird, it had spurs that were less than 1 inch.
Wow.
3/4 to 7/8. So you can't tell, man. I mean, and we've had people kill banded birds that were banded as a Jake that as a 2-year-old had over 1 inch spurs. Mm-hmm. There's no good way to be able to tell.
Like you said, just be happy with your turkey.
Just be happy, man. Yeah, exactly. So no, it's crazy. And there was even publications out that said this is how you age a turkey. But a lot of the research, the banding data, it's been out there recently has kind of blown
now
out
they're
of the
able
water.
to put bands. Talk about the bands that they use for turkeys now and the bands that they tried to use and weren't so successful with, and why.
Yeah, so this was a cool thing. So when I worked for the NWTF, we partnered with Department of Fish and Wildlife to run a banding program on Upper Butte Basin Wildlife Area. That's Little Dry Creek and Howard Slough is the 2 units of Upper Butte Basin that we started banding on. We were initially trying to get an abundance estimate, just how many birds that there were on the wildlife area to justify a hunt program, and that was the initial part of the study. As we continued to capture birds and put bands on, we were only putting these butt end bands on there. So the butt end bands are just an aluminum band, and they're called butt ends because the 2 ends butt together. That's the only thing that holds them on, is it just kind of comes together like that. There's no locking mechanism. Some of the staff at Upper Butte Basin Wildlife Area started finding some of these bands that were pried off underneath the roost trees.
Bands with no turkeys attached to them.
Yeah, and I was like, man, at first I was like, someone's poaching.
It's kind of the only answer.
But no, you look at some of the research across the nation, and they have been shown that turkeys, especially the big toms, can get those butt ends pried off. And I'm not sure if they're using their feet to be able to do that, if they're using their beak in there. I'm not sure how they get the leverage, but they're able to do it. So we purchased a couple hundred rivet bands and started double banding turkeys. And it was really cool to see, because you'd have a bunch of cameras out along the wildlife area, and after about 2 weeks after capture, you'd start seeing toms walking around with just the rivet band on. And you're going, man, we lost a couple years of data, because we had birds out there with butt end bands that who knows how many got ripped off.
And so the rivet band that he's talking about, instead of the butt end, see if I can put it in the camera and focus in on that.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sorry for the people that are just listening.
Yeah, watch this episode on YouTube, but it has a rivet on it that will keep the bird from being able to pry that band off.
Yeah, and they're not able to get that one off.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
And at least you have your data now.
Yeah, so it's been cool. And Dan can talk about kind of what they're transitioning to with the banding program.
What are we going to now?
Forward.
Well, so there's a lot of different ways to get population data, and one of the best techniques to use in terms of accurately and more precisely characterizing population numbers is to use mark recite. Kind of Kevin was talking about, that is something similar to what they were trying to do before, but really when you think about what we would have got out of that data, you really just got mark recite on males only, right? Because what is required to do that type of estimate, it's a really simple formula. It's essentially the number of animal, in this case, it's the number of animals that were harvested, right? That's your recite, so a total number, divided by the number of those animals that were also marked. So that gives you a ratio, right? And then you multiply that by the total number of birds that you marked at a given time. And that gives you a population estimate. Really simple stuff. Learning what we've learned from this, and it's actually critically important if you think about it. We learned that we won't be using butt end bands. We'll be using rivet bands. But we're also going to probably start putting out color bands.
Okay.
So now on a camera, so where mark recite is somewhat difficult in terms of deriving annual estimates is you actually need to mark the animals annually as well. So for a marked population, and we do this with waterfowl as well, I'm really, if a bird was marked in year 1 and shot in year 2 and 3, it's really not being used for mark recite. You're really using what are called brownie estimates. He was the researcher that developed this technique a long time ago. But so we're really worried about what year 1 is. And so if I color mark these animals, I can tell what year they were marked. And from a camera, I don't need to know exactly which. There are some mark recite studies that, particularly on really small populations, I need to know not that you were marked in this year. I need to know exactly who you are. Like with tule geese, we monitor those. I need to read that collar. So I need to know this is this exact bird. But in this case,
the individual.
Right. In this case, the assumptions on turkeys, we're not losing tons of them. So if I go and mark 50, you can assume that 50 are probably still alive by the time I got to do a population estimate. It's not always going to be true, but the sensitivity in the formula isn't the number of birds that were actually marked. It's the ratio itself. So that part, the point is it stays stable. Even if we, truly in the population say we mark 50 and I say there's 50 and there's only 48, that isn't going to mess up the estimate by any means. So that's kind of where we're going with this. And yeah, we're just ordering these bands now. We're going to test this out on Upper Butte.
Are they brightly colored? Or are you worried about hunter selection out of the flock? Or
I don't know. We got this guy over here by knocking turkeys down levees.
yeah,
hunter selection is an issue.
Creating a bias, right?
Are you gonna go on a draw hunt and just pass on a bunch of toms waiting for a banded one? I mean, I feel like that's really not going to be an efficient way. It's not going to bias this situation a lot.
Yeah, I guess depending on where you're doing, if you're doing it in the Upper Butte Basin, where the draw selection is limited and not every Yahoo around California can come out there and try to harvest a turkey. Right. That person has that one day to harvest turkey or 2 days. They're probably going to take what comes in, especially if it's a nice tom, no matter what's on its leg or not on its leg.
Absolutely.
Right. So yeah, if you're overinflating the number of marked birds that are being taken, you got son of a problem there. With geese, we run into situations where folks are targeting collars, right? Mm-hmm. Lucian geese is a big deal. That actually, it doesn't really mess up the estimate as much as it messes up the number of marks that are out there. So it's like we've generated all this, wages and things like that to get these collars or these bands out there. And if we have some people out there selecting for them, that does kind of mess up research to a certain degree. But on these turkeys, it's not going to be that big of a problem.
Yeah. Are you guys doing anything with the transmitters like the ducks have, the solar-powered backpacks to track their movements?
Yeah, good question. So some of the integrated models can be improved by using that sort of home range data. Mm-hmm. And I think for turkeys, that may be necessary. So the one thing about, like, if you look at quail and the way that they parent, I don't know that, put it this way, I don't think telemetry is going to be a really big and useful thing because they're all just kind of like mixed together and doing their own thing. But when you're talking about turkeys, like they're moving all over the place. Like toms are trolling up and down riparian corridors and a lot of times moving really great distances from like where they would have, like if you think about where they start the season before hunting starts, right? That's kind of like, a turkey in its unaltered state, so to speak, right? This is where I've chosen to be. And this is where I'm going to stay. And then eventually over time through things like pressure or even just the changes going on throughout the breeding seasons, hens going to sit on nests and things like that, he's still looking for a hen. So he's going to start trolling up and down. So
how much ground can they cover doing that?
That's a good question. And I think it really depends on what kind of habitat fragmentation is going on in the situation, things like that. But, there's certain spots, I think, Sacramento River, the Feather River, things like that. I mean, many miles,
That's crazy.
Yeah, I think they can move quite some distance. And Chamberlain actually might, and some of the more contiguous habitats in the south, you might see some really long movements that way too. But I think it all just depends on where we're talking.
Yeah, I submitted an upland game bird proposal multiple years ago. I think it was probably 2017. Based off of work that was done by Dr. Chamberlain and Dr. Brett Collier on a state wildlife area in Louisiana. And what they did was pre-season, they went out and captured as many gobblers as they possibly could, put transmitters on all of them, leg bands, and let them go. And then once the hunting season started, they gave each hunter, because it was a lottery draw wildlife area, you had to go through a check station, gave each hunter a GPS. And then recorded how birds were influenced by hunting pressure. Mm-hmm. Really cool data. They learned that the birds that were the closest to the parking lot were the ones that had the best chances of survival because they were used to that pressure. The birds that were furthest away did not have that pressure, and they were easier to be convinced by a hunter that they were a hen. Another cool thing they saw was there was a bird that had like a very small home range on this wildlife area. The day that turkey season started and he got bumped, he moved like 1.5 miles off property and sat there the entire turkey season. Turkey season ended, he came right back to his home range.
Wow.
This sounds like what we deal with here in the Central.
100%. So it was actually in 2015 that I was at the Turkey Symposium when they were presenting this information, and I was just enamored with it. And I was like, we need to do that.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about our hunts here at Gray Lodge, Upper Butte, where you have this, this lottery draw system. You have to go through a check station. And
man, you could replicate it.
Man, you could definitely replicate it. And the cool part about it is then you can say, we can see how this pressure is affecting these birds, whether oh, we have too many people on this landscape, it's pushing these birds off, it's going to have a low success hunt, or man, we're really not affecting them at all.
Yeah.
We can increase hunter opportunity on these lands and you know, create more hunting opportunity overall. So I thought it'd be really cool. Unfortunately, it did not get funded, but it would have been pretty dang cool, man. I would love to have done that.
You know, it's funny you say that. Is that when conversations, and these are just conversations and my thoughts. I'm not going to speak on behalf of anybody in the department.
Little disclaimer.
You know, well, I mean, because what you're talking about there is stuff that I'm actually really interested in myself, and so we have this.
This was before you were in this position.
Yes. Well, no, actually, I was in this position, but I mean, it's just a conversation, you know. And so we're developing. The department's creating an app, you know, and I think the initial run of the app is more for the licensing aspect of things. You can buy stuff online, things like that. Probably e-tagging if we get into that sort of stuff. But one of the things that I was interested in is can we take this a step further? And at the time, I was thinking strictly about our hunter harvest survey. So, you know, in our unit, we do an upland game hunter harvest survey every single year, and the estimates they're all right. I mean, there's a lot of variability depending on the species, obviously. You know, things that are more commonly hunted, you get better estimates on, or at least more precise estimates on. Things that are like sooty grouse and things like that aren't hunted that commonly. Yeah. You don't get the greatest estimates on. But one of the things that I thought was like, man, it'd be sweet to have like a journal aspect built in to this, where the user could also select whether to contribute that data to us as the department. Because now one of the issues that we get with the hunter harvest survey is like, just on the way that it used to have to be done, was you would be calling people about how many mountain quail they got the following May. It's like I was hunting in September. Yeah. I have no idea.
Yeah,
you know,
1.5. I don't know.
So it gives the user a way to document this stuff as they hunt, right? So we're also getting more fine scale data too. You can look at things like, you know, I was actually really interested in this when I was in waterfowl, you know, tracking wildlife area harvest in conjunction with weather, right? Mm-hmm. Can we predict the number of ducks taken on weather events and certain weather events? Obviously, we know that you can do it. I just wanted to see if it actually teased itself out. I like to do that sort of proof of concept stuff just to see if the data makes sense. Same thing for these things. We don't really know what drives a lot of upland bird hunting and how the weather might change it. I think that's kind of interesting from the constituent base aspect, right?
Yeah.
But then also, same thing, some constituents might be interested in what Kevin just mentioned. And so if I was using this app, I could allow the app to track me, and then I get the tracks, and we can look at it in conjunction, like say if we have transmitters distributed on the landscape, easy way to get that data without having to hand somebody a GPS point, you know. And then also, you know, we can look at, you know, just thinking about all the other things like the Southeast and the East have done tons of things on white-tailed deer hunter success, right? What'd be interesting is like, you know, who's getting blacktails out here, right? You know,
Not many people.
How far is that guy walking? I'm walking 12 miles a day, and I ain't killing anything.
Yeah.
So, anyways, it's just, I think there's a lot of, you know, sort of good PR reports that we could get out of that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, I think you might have a stretch with having hunters allow the department to track them, but
well, it is not. You know, and you know, we got this quail genetics project going on. We're getting wings from folks, and we're not going to publish anybody's specific data. There's no way I'm putting somebody's pins on a map. That's insane. Yeah. I'm not putting your route on a map either.
Yeah.
So we could get. I mean, there's obviously ways that we could easily.
It's a consent form. Come on.
I think as both the hunter and the user of such data, I would also want that, you know, that sort of terms of use statement to be airtight against the delivery of my hunting information. As someone who puts quite a bit of time into their turkey hunting spots, I don't really want those on a website somewhere.
No, absolutely not.
But anyway, I think you know, if in this again, this is me just throwing stuff at the wall to see if folks were into it, and it's like with the app, I think we were just developing, you know, a stepwise process. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe we'll talk about it when it comes around. Once we get the base functionality, you know, we'll talk about this extra stuff.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
so let's dive into a little turkey biology. So I've hunted them, and I've hunted them on the ground. And hunting them from the ground is not very fun because they can see you from 9 miles away with their tiny little beady eyes. But for some reason, when I'm in a ground blind, it's like they're looking right through me. So what's the biology that they have with their vision, their hearing, how they roost? Just kind of go through that.
Well, if you've seen any of the more recent stuff on turkey vision, don't believe any of it. It's clearly insane. Birds see color. When you look at birds and you look at, waterfowl or, a strutting turkey or something like that, you see this sort of iridescence to the feathers, that sort of metallic look to it. You look at that through another lens within the UV wavelength. And, this hen who is selecting a male based on, certain fitness characteristics is looking at that and going, he's booming, he's the one, or he's not booming, he ain't the one. So, they're looking at things quite a bit differently than we are. The position on their, not only can they see in different spectrums, and I think, the type of clothing you might wear, they might be able to pick that up at certain distances really well. Movement, obviously,
really
well.
They seem to pick up movement so well.
Well, think about where they're coming from, right? It's like something's going to eat me. I need to be able to detect it.
Everything likes to eat turkeys.
Exactly. And they taste
delicious.
I like
They're
it.
great.
I love it. I got turkey legs out right now for dumplings. But yeah, and then you think about the position on their head, right? They're not, not like us where it's mostly like that sort of, I don't even know if we're 180 degrees really, but, really well is less than that, less than half that circle. They're,
270.
270.
270, geez.
And I feel like they cover that 270.
Not much of a blind spot.
Well, then also think about their heads moving, and their heads never stop.
Yeah.
So, they're covering just about everything. And, it is kind of weird in a sense, like, I've been, and I feel like everybody in this room's probably been in this situation where it's like, I feel like I was off the edge of a road with a decoy out to distract, sitting in a brush pile where there's no way they could have seen me. The sun's not on me. I'm not moving, and they still pick you out. So, they can obviously detect, threats around them with precision that other animals can't do.
The wariest bird I ever saw was when I was hunting with you. The one time we hunted last year.
Yeah.
Dan killed a bird first thing in the morning. We hopped to the other side of the road because we heard another bird gobbling. And he was just hammering down in this little draw, back and forth, to the point where Dan walked 100 yards behind me and is still calling.
The old elk trying to draw him
Trying to
through.
do something. And there was a gravel road, and this bird would not cross that gravel road. And he'd yo-yo. He'd go from one side to the ridge to the other side of the ridge. One side of the ridge to the other side of the ridge. So finally, when he left this one side of the ridge to go this way, I boogied and went straight down right to where he was at. And I was like, all right, it's on. And I could hear him coming back. Dan's still calling. He's gobbling. And it's real thick brush, thick cedar, deer brush. And as soon as I could see him, he was within range. And I was literally locked in like this, and I went like this. And that bird saw me. And he took off. Not even a stop and look, and went, gone. Gave that alarm putt and was out. I was like, are you serious? Like, I was completely covered in brush, completely camouflaged, gloves, face mask, everything. I literally moved my head like this.
Just put your head down in your stock.
Just put it down, and he was gone. I was like, are you serious?
And that spot was sort of new, so it's like we couldn't really characterize, and like nobody was there for a couple of days that I was up there, so I couldn't really characterize what the pressure was like. But the bird that I had shot, yeah, he'd been shot a couple weeks before that, so plenty of beatings in it.
Yeah, he was missing some tail feathers.
Yes, he was a rough-looking guy. But so that bird definitely been played with. Similar story. My brother and I hunted this small group on the Uncompahgre Plateau in Colorado off the Divide Road, and this bird, like, he would just be hammering in the morning. You call him in, and as soon as you see him, he'd do this. 4 hens in front of him. They're still coming towards the decoys. Hens make it to the decoys. He turns tail and runs and flies across a canyon. I hunted that bird for 4 days. On the last day I hunted him, I woke up at 1 a.m. I got up in there and sat in these aspen trees and waited. And I knew I was in the spot. Bird flies down. I hit the call once. I see his head pop up. He's in range, but he wasn't in front of my gun. And boom, off. Just took off, run. So it's just, and my brother ended up getting that bird. How he got him was kind of incredible, but he basically covered himself in leaves and laid down.
This is fantastic.
And he's like, I called, he come up over the top, and I guess he didn't see me, and he took another 5 steps in this canyon that the bird would fly across. When he come up over the top, if you got into a certain spot, he was already in gun range. So all he did was take 2 more steps to show his chest up, and he got him. And if you go on the whole spur thing, he's like got 1/2-inch spurs, you know what I mean? So it's not like, you feel like he couldn't have been all that well seasoned. Nobody else had hunted this bird. I don't know what his deal was.
That's
but
crazy.
he just didn't want anything to do with what we had to give him. Even, again, his hens would even come to us within 10 yards. He did not follow. He would turn the tail and run.
So going on the vision part, turkey vision, incredible during the day. At night, not so much, right?
Definitely not. They can see to some degree, but obviously not well.
Yeah.
When I had a bunch of friends that had walkers and we would hunt coons back east, and, coon goes up a tree, they get the spotlight out and you're looking for him. And it was not uncommon to like run into a flock of turkeys. And sometimes they'd flush out, and then you hear this big loud crack right into a tree. And then other times I remember them landing in the branches. Like, wow, how'd you do that? It's pitch black. It's midnight, and you managed to actually touch down. So.
Well, and that's the reason. I mean, that's the reason they roost at night, right? Because they don't have that night vision, so they got to go up and avoid predation somehow.
Yep.
And that's by getting up in those trees roosting at night. They do it every night. So you're not seeing turkeys hit in the middle of the road in the middle of the night, hopefully.
Something to be wrong.
Or someone that says they drove their car off the road because the turkey was in the middle of the road in the middle of the night. They were full of it.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy to have, and it has to do with, the rods and cones in their actual eyeballs, but to have such incredible vision during the day and then at night.
Yeah.
Just nothing.
Yeah.
just goes.
I mean, we're kind of the same way, but they have much better vision than us during the day.
True.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. And hearing for that matter, like it's just the stuff that they pick up on. It's
and how they can pinpoint it.
Right.
Yeah, they can pinpoint from a long ways away, can't they?
Yes, right on you. It's like I feel like, you run into that in the hills a lot, where it's for you as a human, like judging the distance in which a bird is. He already knows where you are, but you're sitting there dithering on how far this turkey is. Should I move closer? Should I not? The amount of times you get burned on. Oh, I need to move closer. And no, he's right there.
Yeah, so let's kind of work into hunting tactics with this. So, like you said, you hear that bird. What's the most common mistake that people are going to do?
I think moving too much, honestly. Trying to close too close. There's situations where I feel like getting close, makes sense, right?
And what's close? What are we talking close?
Well, I mean, if you play it kind of a normal morning, right? You show up like normal turkey hunters do. People, we're always showing up at noon. You show up early in the morning. Birds on the roost. I'm trying to get to about 200 yards.
Okay.
Once you start to get within, like, you don't know where all the hens are, right?
Yeah.
You're just hearing this bird gobble. And within 200-yard radius, he's probably got hens posted up. If they bust you, the morning's over already. Did you get out of bed that early to just blow it up, right? Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of people out there that are apparently willing to do that, just from my personal experience. If you're doing it right, try to get within 200 yards. And again, if you've done it right, or able to do it right? We got kids now, so it's not exactly like I can go out and scout every single day. But, if you've scouted these birds, you have a kind of idea what they're going to do on a given day. So
best case scenario, if you can roost them the night before, know exactly where they're at, so you're not going to walk underneath them in the morning.
Exactly. Try to know if you could get out at night. That's like, I'd say that's the one. If I've taught a lot of people how to turkey hunt, and that's like the one thing. It's like, if you know what the game plan is already, you know the position of the hens the night before or something like that, or just even like rough within that 200-yard sort of area that you can get to, you're focused on getting to a tree and just sitting down. Everything is quick, it's quiet, and the likelihood of ruining the hunt before it actually happens is substantially lower. So yeah, I mean, trying to get in close there, but like, once the birds are on the ground, things play out. I think the same deal, like I said before, like trying to get a good direction, of course, trying to get a good distance on where a bird is, and play it soft, because if you get too close, it is over. Yeah. And a lot of times, particularly in those midday birds or late day birds, when they gobble, the probability of you getting them is high.
Yeah, they're coming.
Yeah, I mean, the turkeys that I'm often hunting now in the national forest, like if a bird gobbles in the afternoon, I'm about 90% on getting that bird. Mm-hmm. So don't mess it up. Yeah. Oftentimes they'll run to you. So, just try to get, an idea of what they are, the barriers in between you as well, right? Like if a bird gobbles and you're like, oh, I should post up, and there's like, something significant in between you, like a big fence, we're running to that now on the river with a lot of this, a lot of wire going up on certain things, or, even a river or something like that, or a creek.
Gravel road.
Yeah. Something in the way. You might want to consider that, but, I think just playing it conservative and not ruining the hunt before it actually happens is kind of important.
What about calling? Do people usually undercall? Do they overcall? What's the common theme?
Yeah, man, that's one of those things that's been debated since I was a little kid, man. I'll be honest, like if anything, I'm the overcaller.
I'm the same way.
Yeah,
I call a lot.
I knew a lot of super old guys that would literally go in, make one call, and they would not do it again. I was like, man, that sounds boring.
Exactly.
This is not what this is for.
It's not my cup of tea. It can be a very successful way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the guy in the duck blind. It's like every duck that goes by, it's like, is that high? Now we'll call it. Just see what happens. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know, part of calling is part of the fun of the hunt, right?
Yeah.
It's part of the ADHD.
Yeah, well, that's 100% true. And I've got that in spades. But I think, I don't know, I mean, some of it is kind of feeling it out as well. If the bird is responding well to you, keep them hot, man. Keep them hot. Bring them, especially on these public areas, because bringing them is like the thing, right?
Well, and that's the hard part too on a public area. If you've got a bird that's hammering and you've got other people around, how much longer is it before someone slides in between you?
Yep.
That's getting into the ethics part of it, and the morals of being out there with other hunters, and man, if someone's already on a bird and calling at them, just go find your own bird.
We got a lot of turkeys in this state. A lot of turkeys in this state.
Because it is so frustrating. And 90% of the time when that happens, neither of you are going to kill that bird.
Yeah.
That bird's going to get boogered up. People call on different angles. It's just going to go away.
And if you look at it this way too, and maybe it's not the best way to look at it, but I was just looking at this the other day. We got about 25,000 spring turkey hunters in California, which seems low.
It does seem low.
Yeah.
And we shoot about 25,000 gobblers in the spring. It's like everybody gets one.
Yeah.
Just let that guy get a turkey, man. It's not a big deal. There's another one. It's almost guaranteed. Especially on a lot of the public areas, like in the valley, a lot of these public areas are in spots where turkeys are constantly transitioning through.
Yeah.
It's not like you have this super limited amount of turkeys. There's always going to be turkeys there. So yeah, like Kevin said, like the ethics aspect, somebody's working a bird. When I grew up, man, if you moved in on somebody else's bird and you drove to where you're at, you might be seeing somebody at your car.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
To have a little discussion. It's usually not going to go real well for you.
Yeah.
But I mean, these areas, our areas are much the stuff that I see out here, at least on the public areas, is just the number of folks. There's just tons and tons of people. So I understand, like, you're going to bump people's turkeys.
Yeah, and granted, I mean, I've hunted a lot of public areas over the years, and I've only had that happen 2 or 3 times, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. Actually.
Yeah, it hasn't happened a lot. And usually I'm hunting areas that I don't see very many other people, a lot lower turkey densities. So a lot of times I don't see very many turkeys.
Yeah.
But when you do, a lot of times you have them to yourself, and it's a lot more of a fun game to play.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I found enjoyment too, is like, I think a lot of folks now are putting in a lot more effort than they ever have. It just seems like you see a lot more folks far back when you're hunting big game, and and I see people in spots where they're hunting turkeys where I cannot believe this person's back here. So I mean, there's
a lot more people with a boat on the river now.
Yeah, I think I got rid of my boat right about the right time.
Yeah.
But like, just getting out there, you don't need to hunt the spot where you hear 50 birds blowing off in the morning. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's exciting, and I've sent plenty of audio recordings to my friends back east, and it's just hilarious. I mean, it's like I said, 21 days one year before I ever heard a turkey.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, so I think about things in a little bit different context than the average person. But, you want to get some enjoyment. You go out there and you look for those little bit lower density spots. There's plenty of enjoyment to be had out there.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, I think there's plenty of success to be had out there as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hunting turkeys in the national forest, a lot of fun. I love hunting them on the river. I've actually still have yet to kill a true Sacramento River bird. I've struck out too many times to even want to talk about it on the river. For some reason, it's my goat. I can't get that one.
That's an odd one.
It is. It's very odd. But yeah, I love hunting them in the mountains. Love hunting them in the snow. It's just an adventure.
Yeah.
You could just go on and out in the middle of nowhere and find a flock of birds and have it yourselves. And it's so much fun.
Well, that's it's kind of interesting. And I don't know. It seems, anecdotally, like this is a thing, but we got a lot of out-of-staters coming in now, and so
interesting.
I get
49 state Super Slam, man.
It's
a thing.
Well, and like they're all saying
I will not be doing that.
I will. Well, I can't wait to retire just to do that. But yeah, I got a call from a guy from Alabama the other day. Years ago, guys from Kansas, Nebraska, and they're all like, I hear, and I don't know, maybe they're seeing this stuff. Maybe it's on YouTube. I don't know.
I screwed up. I was too good of a job with a PR with the NWTF.
Yeah.
Well,
terrible.
The areas that they're asking to hunt is like mostly down in the valley. I feel like your stuff with that was more up in the
I push a lot of people into the valley. Because, honestly, you look at densities, and the highest densities birds in this entire state along the Sac Valley.
It's a no-brainer.
100%.
If you've got a limited amount of time,
Yeah.
I'm going to put you in the best spot,
Well,
being a nice person.
And you take someone who is just a turkey assassin from the southeast, and you put them on the Sac River, they're going to kill a bird. It's going to happen.
Yep.
Like, there's no doubt in my mind. So that's what I've done, and every time I get that call back of, I've never heard so many turkeys in my life.
Yeah.
They're just not used to it, and they have a great time. So I did push a lot of people into the Sac River units because they could kill birds there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this last year, opening day, there was a guy from Tennessee up at one of my spots up in Forest Service, and I was like, man. So
right. Yeah.
Yes, it was cool. He was a great guy. I left him alone. He killed a bird.
Nice.
I went and hunted a completely different spot.
Yeah.
And he went from there, and I think he jumped over to Nevada. And
He
then
was
going-
all over the place.
Oh yeah, no. When those guys make a trip out west, they're hitting 3 or 4 states.
Yeah.
in a go.
These guys are same thing. They
Very
want to
serious.
hunt Northern Cal, and then they're going to segue into Oregon,
yep.
right?
Yep.
And so this guy from Alabama, same deal. And cool dude. He's just like, I just kind of want to get the experience. I want to see the different spots. And so I give him, you've got some Sac River's obviously like a no-brainer, but then you got, some other spots in that oak woodland, which I think is really cool. Have fun with those ants and ticks, but whatever. I mean, he probably deals a lot worse stuff than we do.
Yeah, they are crazy ticks over there.
Cottonwood's the deal, or
Cottonmouths.
Cottonmouths,
Yeah. No thanks. I'll pass.
And then, he's going to try, it sounds like he's probably going to try some high elevation stuff, Alturas, Modoc and up into that area. So before he ends up in Klamath National Forest.
Yeah, and I've even had guys down, they're coming to a conference in San Diego and asking about Cleveland National Forest and bumping around over there. Like, I mean, everywhere throughout the state, you can make it happen.
Yeah, there's opportunity for sure. And I think that's one of the things, hearing from particularly folks in the South, they're definitely jealous of the amount of public property that we got to hunt. Like, when I go back to, Pennsylvania, it isn't like that. I had reign over all private property at the time, and things have changed. Those folks aren't alive anymore. Those properties have passed on, and the sort of area where my parents or my dad and my brother, they could hunt is shrunk considerably. Right?
Yeah. What about opportunities on CDFW lands? What are those looking for?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of different options. We've got the standard sort of draw set up. We've got some properties that are draw for the entire season, like Oroville. We've got properties that are only draw for the first 9 days, like Spenceville. But essentially, we have the draw for those types of properties are split up into 2 categories. You have the opening weekend, right? So you can put in for a Saturday or Sunday, or then we got the balance of state. And so while, say like a place like Oroville, like I said, it's open, it's huntable on the weekends, all season, but you can only apply for 1 day that's open after the opening weekend. I think we offer something like 65 unique hunts. Man, I had this number in my head, and I'm blanking on the total number of properties that we have to choose from. Not all of which are ours. The system is actually kind of interesting. And before I took this position, I really didn't know actually how much or how these things came about. But some of the hunts out there are not actually our property.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Lake Sonoma,
Kanaka Valley, right?
Yeah.
Lake Sonoma is another one, and so they do a lot to sort of facilitate that with our regional biologists, and then those come back to me and my group, to facilitate within our licensed revenue for the draw itself. But we have a couple options that way, and in terms of the draw, those are high quality. I mean, man, there's not a bad one out there.
Yeah.
If you look at odds wise, I think Spenceville Wildlife Area probably has the best odds to draw. Anybody from back east would take the worst hunt we had.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to take the worst hunt we have because they're all pretty outstanding. Obviously an opening day hunt or a Saturday hunt on a sort of isolated hunt that way is always going to be better because the birds haven't been messed with, right? That pressure aspect. But you're going to
They're harder to draw.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to just deal with difficulty of drawing. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for.
Well, and then Carson, talk about the opportunities we have in CWA's hunt program. I mean, those have been increasing every year, it seems like.
Yeah, the hunt program will have north of 30 hunts this year on a mix of CWA properties, as well as some river partner properties through Calusa, up by Llano Seco, over by Knight's Landing. So we have general hunts, Hoodoo Island as well, right next to Birdhaven. And our success rate's very, very, very high. And it's more it's more of a here we're going to put you in a ground blind. You sit here until something walks by kind of hunt, as opposed to here go figure it out yourself. But when you see the success rates, you can't really bash it. And we've had people be like, all right, well, I'm going to sit till 8:30. And if I don't see anything, I'm going to get out of the blind. I'm like, I don't recommend that, because we have very straight, long, open properties. And they get out and they say, well, did you kill anything? No. But we spooked 5 birds over here. And it's like, well, yeah. So
and that's actually kind of interesting, because it empirically supports one of the things I mentioned before, which is just don't move too much. The more you move, is these open. They're working the roads just like we work the roads.
Yeah.
Right? So the longer you sit in a given spot, I feel like the more likely you are to get something and not mess up your day. Because again, you ruin it. It's like you spook these birds. Sometimes they can get back into it an hour or so later, but most often it's a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to mention too, while we're on the topic of draw hunts, we also have the share program. I don't think it's got lots of turkey hunts in that.
There's a couple. They're down south too, I think. Tulare.
That's the one that's like, man, trying to get those folks, further south, particularly San Joaquin, is like going to be probably my next focus, to try to get some more draw hunts. Mm-hmm. Just I feel like we're not doing it well. It's tough. There's not as many turkeys down there. The opportunities, it's going to be high quality.
Like Millerton's one of the draws down there.
So I think trying to collectively work with some interagency folks to try to get some more hunts down there, maybe some private stuff. And similarly, to the CWA hunt program, the share program success rate is really high. So if you draw one of those, it's definitely well worth it. Your odds of actually getting something is pretty impressive.
Well, and for some of those Southern California folks too, there's the NWTF chapter down there out of San Diego, a great chapter. They have the turkey tune-up every year in February, and as a part of that turkey tune-up, you have the opportunity to draw for hunts on Lake Sutherland. It's one of the rare kind of opportunities down there to hunt some technically private ground. I think it's owned by the city of San Diego. So there's that opportunity there. Then there's also, if you're a junior, they have a great opportunity on the San Isabel Preserve, I think also owned by the city of San Diego. And that's a really awesome, high quality hunt. You have a lot of the folks from the chapter, volunteers, mentor guides. And so the kids get a mentor guide down there, and they get birds that essentially get messed with one time a year.
Wow. That's awesome.
And it can be an awesome hunt.
Yeah.
It's a great partnership. It's crazy that the city of San Diego,
would allow that.
But they've been a great partner with the chapter and the department down there for that.
Yeah, that one's definitely appreciated. We have something similar. It's the Cañada de los Osos junior hunt out of San Jose. Those properties around that, boy, it'd be great to get those into, one of these sort of CWA or a share sort of thing, because just the opportunity is huge.
Yeah. Those properties are gorgeous. Cañada de los Osos, my God.
Yeah, really
right next to Henrico State Park.
Yes.
Ooh, beautiful, beautiful country. Tons of turkeys, tons of pigs, tons of black
tails. Yeah, that's the other part is, trying to get more pig hunts out there. But yeah, just locking down the turkey spots there in the bay would be great too. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there that we're not getting. And, I think with our R3 stuff, the recruitment, retention, and reactivation efforts within the department, we're going to get there to a certain degree. There's opportunity there. It's definitely limited, but I think in the next few years we could probably get some more hunts out there.
Yeah.
So, and that's one thing too, is like, I don't really care if we're taking them or if CWA's taking them, as long as it's available to the public. Man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because there's so much landlocked land that has turkeys that nobody's doing anything with. And it's like, this is such a great opportunity for the people that don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
It's just how do you get to those landers? So if you are listening and you have turkeys and you'd like to donate, please reach out, because we'll take whatever we can get.
Yes.
Yeah. And turkey hunting is great. I mean, it's a great entry level opportunity for new folks, right? Yeah. Because you can get out there and you may not kill a turkey, you may not kill a turkey a whole season, but you're gonna hear turkeys. You're gonna hear turkeys. You're gonna interact with birds. It's gonna be a lot more engagement than it would be for trying to start out hunting deer in California.
And not seeing anything for the first 4 years.
It's tough. A doe. It is tough. I think that for someone who's just starting to get into hunting, or they're thinking about getting into hunting, turkey is a great opportunity. I mean, the only things that you need for a turkey hunt are a license, an upland game bird validation, a method to take, whether it's a bow and arrow archery equipment, or a crossbow, or a shotgun, and camouflage. Those are the things you really need.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other stuff you could buy, But those are the only things that you really need to actually go out and go turkey hunting.
Yes, the gadgetry is extensive. So
well, it's not as bad as duck hunters.
No,
I would agree.
Yeah, it's one decoy versus a suite, and
Well, I know guys who have full spread to decoys. But
I've seen them.
The turkey flock spreads.
and they are duck hunters. So,
Yes, yes. I've seen the guy with the bag of turkey.
We're gonna have some Mojo turkey decoys coming here soon.
Oh, I'm sure. I've seen the ones on the on like the remote control car mount that turn around and do stuff. But another PSA for someone that has been shot in a hunting situation: don't reap turkeys. Don't hold a fan in front of your face. It's not a good idea. Yes, it's cool to see how these birds react, but it's not a good idea. I've had people say, "Well, I only do that on private ground." Well, you know what the number one violation is during turkey season?
Trespassing.
Trespass. So
You might want to look at the ballistic gel penetration on TSS shot before you go doing any reaping. I feel like, when you see that at 50 yards.
Well, and the really scary part is like, you go to states like Montana, Wyoming, where you can actually use a rifle during the spring season.
Yeah.
And you've got people out there reaping turkeys in these big open landscapes. That's scary, scary, scary stuff.
I hunted South Florida many, many years ago, and some guys come up on us. It was on public property, and dudes in the back of a Toyota pickup with a 223 on a bipod. And they come right, they're rednecks, they come riding up on it. Look at you boys in your fancy camouflage. I was like, oh God, now I see why we're not seeing anything.
They were ready to go.
They got a lot of turkeys, he told me. So
I bet they did.
Well, 223, one a day, no season limits. I mean, you could get you could pile them up pretty quick.
Wow. Yeah, no kidding. But yeah.
Well, guys, you have any parting thoughts for us before we close out?
I hope it's a better turkey season than last year.
Amen to that. We'll find out soon.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. It's never bad.
Never bad.
Good. Well, I appreciate you guys coming out again. And thank you for talking on Save for the Blind podcast.
Thanks, Carson. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Carson.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in this episode of Save It for the Blind podcast. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere podcasts are found.